Hi and welcome to this video. It's all about this sound card, the creative Soundblaster 32 PnP. Not a card that I was familiar with until pretty recently when I saw one on eBay that was in a pretty poor state and it was cheap, so I thought, it looks like an AW32, it looks interesting, so I bought it. We're going to try and fix it up and get it working in this video. So here's the card. Essentially it was sold as working. It had a missing bracket, so I've stolen one off one of my sort of less desirable plug and play Soundblaster 16s. It's a perfect fit, and replaced the one on that card with something off an old Opti card or something that isn't quite the right one but works. The main problem with this is the memory card slots are broken. The tabs will not hold memory anymore. Aside from that, it's in pretty good nick, just needs a bit of a dusting. Here you can see how the memory just kind of flops around in there. I haven't actually tried this yet, so I'm just taking the eBay seller's word that it works. We'll try that out first in just a second, but to get the main sort of use out of this card, we're definitely going to have to do something about these memory slots. Apart from that, yeah, that bracket off that Soundblaster 16 fits perfectly, so that's good. Almost as original, I would guess. And yeah, I got some new replacement memory slotty things off eBay. These were expensive, so altogether I think I probably spent about £50 on this card now in total, but I think that's still cheaper than you generally pay to get one complete. So once I got the card, you can see it's a CT3670, and I started googling as I usually do after I've spent my money instead of before. And yeah, there's a bit of info about this. Phil's Computer Labs did an excellent video, and also it seems that this card is a super versatile sound card. Covers all sorts of bases and goes to all sorts of places I've not been before. Never done any of these AWE sound fonty kind of things before. So the AWE 32, or AW32 as I keep calling them, I don't know if that's right or not, came out in 1995 and it was a pretty expensive card. It used its own kind of AW synthesizer, the EMU 8000, and it was all kind of on-board proprietary stuff, so it wasn't using MPU 401 or anything like that, so games had to be especially written to take advantage of it. The original AW32 I think had 512 kilobytes of onboard RAM. I'm not too sure about that. Expandable using the memory slots to 32 megabytes I think. I've seen 28 some places, 32 others. This is the same, except it doesn't have any onboard RAM. This Soundblaster 32 PnP came out about a year later. I think some of the original AW32s had OPL on the board, but this doesn't. It just uses Creative's own CQM for its FM synthesis. So then we've got this chip here. So this card is a CT3670, which is one of the many variations of the AW32 and the Soundblaster 32. This one's special in a lot of ways. So on here we've got DSP 4.16, which does away with a lot of issues you had with earlier AWE cards like hanging notes and that kind of thing. I think this is the chip that speaks to the EMU sound processor as well. So once I've watched around a few other videos and read a bit about this, I think it is quite an exciting card to have. It's very, very versatile, does all sorts of stuff, which we'll get into in a minute, so I was really quite excited to have one in my collection, probably even more excited than just getting one of the more desirable and expensive AW32s, like the big long huge ones that cost a fortune on eBay these days. These things are getting quite expensive as well. I saw one for under £100 and quite a few over £100, so yeah, they're getting quite rare as well. So to begin with, the first two standards that this card offers us is first of all this EMU chip that gives us the AWE synthesis that is supported in some games, not all of them, so you have to choose that from your list of digital music providers alongside general media and all the rest of it, so be interested to see how that sounds. And then we've got our normal FM synthesis supplied by the CQM chip, not as good as the OPL you got on some of the AWE 32s, but to be honest I've never really had a problem with it. So there's not really much to see on the card. We've got our jumper alongside our chips there. This, I believe, enables or disables MPU 401. Or we're going to want to keep it enabled on this card because it's not just for providing external media. It does some other funky stuff that I've never tried before, which we're going to be trying shortly. There's kind of an empty space here. I wonder if that on some versions of this was for onboard memory. I'm not really sure. So aside from that, there really isn't much to see. There's a couple of other little pins over towards the top right, and these are just to run wires to, so that you can run your PC speaker through this if you wanted to. Probably not something I'd be bothered about. Right, enough talking, time to do something. So the first thing I'm probably going to do is try this out to see if it actually works, because I don't know that for sure yet. Got the memory slot here ready to go on as well. Don't know if this is new old stock or still being manufactured. I know they're hard to find and expensive, and hopefully I'll never need to buy another one after this. So this is basically an AW64 with memory slots, and it just so happens in the machine that we're going to be testing it on, my AW64 was in there, which I've just taken out. So it's curious to see the two cards side by side. So basically they're very similar. I think you can even flash the Soundblaster 32 PnP with the AW64 BIOS. The only difference is it's easy to put RAM in the Soundblaster 32, and you can see the proprietary memory socket thing at the top left of the AW64, which makes it difficult to upgrade. You can get sort of retrofit kits, but basically they're a pain in the ass. And when you do get these kits, they kind of plug into that socket with a board with that kind of arrangement on. Only I think the 72 pin memory rather than 30, which is a bit better. Enough of that AW64, and onto this AW64 in disguise. We're going to get it plugged in before we replace this, and yeah, it looks pretty straightforward. It's just a single row for each memory socket. The slot A machine that I put my Voodoo 2 SLI rig into in the last video, 600 megahertz Athlon, is still out on the bench, so I've been messing about with that, and we'll use that to test this card. That looks pretty good in there. I've always loved the look of these cards, the ones with the SIM slots in them. I think they look kind of mad. Admired them in magazines, but could never afford one back in the day, so happy to have one now. Booting into Windows 98, the card is detected automatically, which is quite cool. So a lot of the other videos I've seen people demonstrate the OR series of cards in DOS and using ORUtil and stuff like that. So I thought, just to be marginally different, I'm just going to deal with it in Windows, and I'm not going to go into DOS at all. So we'll see how that goes. I grabbed a game off the shelf just to see if we can get some sound out of it, and Magic Carpet was what came to hand, which seems to have quite a good range of support for different standards, but I don't really care what I'm choosing right now. I just want to see if I can get some sound out of the card, and then I know that it works, and then we can proceed. So it works, yay! Now let's sort this memory slot thing out. So I've got my budget solder sucker, which is just basically a handheld sucker, but it's got a heated element, which is super handy, so you don't have to hold the soldering iron up against it. So looking at this thing, the tabs are broken, and it is just two nice rows of things that I have to desolder. So this thing is pretty funky and pretty cheap. For somebody who doesn't use it very often, it's not worth buying one of those funky electric ones. So basically you just depress it, put your hot hollow point over the thing, wait until it melts, and pull the trigger. Out it comes. Simple as that. So, a bit of wrist cramp later. They're all out. There are a couple of stubborn ones. They've folded the tabs at the end of the memory holder down to keep it in place, so they're a bit more difficult to get the sucker on. So I used braid on some of the more stubborn ones, and they were still pretty clogged up, to be honest. I was getting a little bit more out each time. Then I figured that the best way to approach it might be, I took a fairly blunt screwdriver, careful not to scratch the solder mask, and it did pop off, but I pulled it out so that it left a few of the pins in there, and I figured that if I can get some heat on the other side, they might come free a bit easier. After that, it was just a case of gently working each one. I put a bit of pressure on the back with them with a pair of snipe nose pliers, just applied a bit more wick, a bit more heat, and one by one they slowly came out and all the holes were clear. So please don't hate me because my soldering sucks. I know I'm not very good at this, but I always figure if you just do things slowly enough and carefully enough, you should be able to get there in the end. So all the holes are clear. I popped the new SIM socket in there, and I've done what they did, bent the two end pins on either row outwards, so it's held the thing in place. And my methodology here is just to lather every pin in flux, and then we'll get soldering. So we've done a row on the other side. It's a bit sooty looking because of the smoke off the flux. Somebody on Twitter was going, what temperature did you use on your soldering iron? I think it was about 450 degrees centigrade. I'm not very scientific or knowledgeable about these things. I tend to just heat the iron up until it readily melts the solder, and then off I go. So yeah, just one more row to do. The only thing I usually do on here, aside from lathering it in solder, is to make sure that the pad is completely covered all the way around. I have a habit of kind of soldering one side and leaving the other side unsoldered, so I just make sure I do that, and that's pretty much all there is to it. So that's it. Looks okay. It doesn't look factory finished, but it looks okay. I don't think there's any sort of shorts or scrapes or scratches. I don't think I've done any harm, and it all looks well connected. Gonna just get rid of some of the, like I said, some of the sooty bits from where the flux was smoking, and there's also a bit of excess flux on there, so cotton buds and IPA till we get it clean. And there we have it. So a bit like launching a ship with a bottle of champagne, the moment of truth. So I only have 1 meg sims, so you have to put them in matched pairs, I believe, so you can have 2 1s, 2 4s, 2 8s, 2 16s. So only going to be 2 megs on this card, though I think because I'm not doing any music-y stuff and not going to be loading any large custom sound font banks or anything, it should just do for the things that I want to do, which we will be exploring shortly. Moment of truth. So I've been to archive.org and got the original Soundblaster 32 PnP installation disk, though I believe that it will work fine with your 32 drivers from any of the disks. I think there was some on Phil's Computer Labs website as well that he used when he did his review, but I think he'd kind of broken them down into separate little bits, but we're just going to try it with the original disk and see how that goes. This is just a Windows 95 disk, so I'm not quite sure. We'll have to try and figure out what goes on with DOS when you load these things. So it loads a whole suite of funky programs, MIDI players, CD players, all sorts of stuff. Not really going to look at that today. All I'm really interested in is looking at some of its game playing goodness. So yeah, all cool. So in here we've got this funky little program called Control Panel. So Control Panel, I believe, is the equivalent of AUTIL, which is a tool a lot of people were familiar with in DOS to set these cards up to do some of the funky stuff that we're about to explore in a moment. There's all sorts of other MIDI related stuff. That green means that it can see 2 megabytes of RAM, which means my slot has worked. My slot replacement has worked. Ham-fisted as it was, so that's cool. So memory will be working in here. Try and get some bigger sims at some point. And then there's all sorts of other kind of MIDI related stuff. You know, your MIDI keyboard, boink blunk. But the main thing that we're interested in here is the synth section, because in the synth section you can do some pretty funky stuff to do with gaming. Because it's in here that you can load your sound font banks, SPK files, and off that driver disk it comes with a bunch. So you've got a general MIDI one, you've got an MT32 one, you've got a GS one, and that kind of covers you for your MIDI bases, and you can make your own. You can do all sorts of crazy stuff with this stuff. A whole other video in there, but basically it means that you've got support for all of these things. So you've got 3 new synths MIDI formats that it supports, plus your AWE32 format, plus your FM format. So 5 formats are supported with this card. So using these sound font banks, it uses MPU 401 to emulate them, so it's not going to be possibly quite as good as the real thing, like driving a Wave Blaster for which there is no header on this card anyway, or an external media device. But you've got, you've got so much stuff. You've got general media, you've got GS, you've got MT32, then you've got your FM, then you've got your AW32 support as well. So you're talking about 5 formats are supported, and then on top of that, there are effects here in these MIDI settings, and they can be applied to your FM. So you can add reverb and chorus and stuff like that to your Soundblaster Pro. So it's all pretty funky stuff, and a lot of choice, and a lot of, you can go to a lot of games, older games that only support MT32 and stuff like that, and see what they sound like. I've never heard MT32, so looking forward to giving it a go. So I did agonise a bit over what games to try this on. Originally I was going to do a variety of games, but then when I was looking at Theme Park, I just thought, Theme Park covers all of them, so you can literally play all of them one after the other, and Theme Park has such a long, funky musical intro. It's about 3 minutes long altogether, so what I'm going to do is play the whole thing from start to finish and just chop and change between the different formats. I'll label them so you can see what they are, and you can decide for yourself which ones you think sound best, because there's some pretty funky sounding stuff in there. So before you do each test, we have to go into the control panel. If we're using one of the MIDI emulation modes, that is, we have it set to use the MPU 401, and we have to set it to the correct sound bank, so that sound bank gets loaded into our new memory chips, and then we're good to go to run it for MT32 or general media or whatever. So there you go. I think that's a super sound card. It's super versatile, gets all your bases covered with early gaming, early DOS gaming, and Windows 95 to some extent. Some of those games only have MT32, some of them only have all 32, and some of them only have general media, and you got it all covered here. Probably not to the same extent you would with a Wave Blaster card or an external media device, but it sounds pretty good to me. I particularly like the AW32 for some reason. That really really resonates with me. What can I say? So yeah, that's pretty impressive card. I'm really pleased I've got it. Some of the guys in the chat on one of the posts said that also there were some games that had kind of exclusive sound fonts for the OR32 emulation. I think Ultima Online, Final Fantasy VII. I was trying to get some discs for Final Fantasy VII, but then kind of ran out of time and ran out of energy, so I might visit those at some other point. Thank you for suggesting them. So yeah, if you made it this far, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring this card with me, and I'll hope you join me for the next video. So thanks a lot for watching. See you next time.